As we continue our exploration of the four pillars of composition, we've covered simplicity, and now we're going to move on to asymmetry and focus on that. Asymmetry. How do we talk about asymmetry, and how do we affect asymmetry in the image? Well, I've got a pretty simple technique that I use. And here is what I do. I look at vertical asymmetry, horizontal asymmetry, and then four quadrants. And this is kind of my variation on the rule of thirds. And if you've ever studied the rule of thirds, you know the rule of thirds takes and divides the image up into thirds, horizontally and vertically. When I'm shooting outdoors and I have a limited view in my camera, I do something that's kind of a variation on that theme. First, I draw a horizontal line through the middle of the image, make sure top and bottom are different. Then I draw a line down through the middle, make sure that right and left are different. And then I look at all four quadrants. And I can do this in just a matter of seconds. And this allows me to create good asymmetrical compositions and move things out of the center, which is one of the central ideas behind asymmetry and the rule of thirds, is moving things out of the center off towards the edges because it encourages the movement of the eye around the image. So on this image, when we do this, we employ this technique. I look at left and right. And notice that in this image, the left and right would be pretty similar. Up top, they're somewhat different because of this peak, right? And this is the primary focus image, so that's good. 1 and 2, these two quadrants are certainly separate. But in the lower half of the image, quadrants 3 and 4 would be nearly identical if it was all water. So I made sure that I added this little bit of shoreline down here. And it does a couple of things. It adds a nice asymmetry to quadrants 3 and 4, but it also helps create this nice eye line from foreground to middle ground to background. All right. So it's subtle but very powerful in this image. All right, here's an example where asymmetry partially works and partially not. Again, let's employ our technique. Let's do left and right side, left side. They're fairly similar. This section of trees here really helps make that left and right asymmetry. When we do the top and bottom, they're certainly different. When we look at the four quadrants, 1, 2, this tree sticking up makes the difference with these down here. So quadrants 1 and 2, yes, but quadrants 3 and 4 are pretty darn similar. And that's because, if we talked about in the complexity section, this is very complex. There's no separation here, so everything is pretty much the same. So top half of this image works pretty well, but the bottom half doesn't. And also notice that, the framing of this image is horizontal, where most of the motion, most of the eye lines are vertical in this image. In this image, when you look at it, you go, oh, that's nicely asymmetrical. And indeed, there are some parts that are. When we do our left and right, all right, they're certainly different. Top and bottom are certainly different. We do the quadrants, upper left, upper right. Quadrants 1 and 2 are different. When we come down here, 3 and 4 are just too darn similar. There is some difference between them, but nothing like quadrants 1 and 2. So that's why, the top 2/3 of this image is very, very nice, but the bottom third, because of its complexity and similarities in here and lack of separations of the image elements, the asymmetry doesn't work as well throughout the entire image as it does at the top 2/3. Now, asymmetry doesn't have to be smack you in the face obvious. Sometimes subtlety is all you need. And on this image, notice this is a single component, a single element image. Right, so I'm not going to be pushing this all the way up to the upper right or upper left corner or something. But what I did make sure in this image is that it's offset just slightly to the right. And I went to the right because, see, the tree is more, the edge of the tree here, the eye line here is more up and down. And this is quite a bit, in and out, along this edge. So I wanted to give it a little bit more room over here to breathe for these to stick out into. So this side has got a little bit fatter over here, a little bit thinner here. So when I do my left and right, it's just subtly offset to the right, but it has an enormous impact. If you put this right smack dab in the middle, it doesn't look nearly as good as it is slightly offset. So now all four quadrants are separate as well as top and bottom. So sometimes asymmetry just needs to be simple. Now, this is kind of a slappy-in-the-face asymmetrical image, right? But there's also some subtle asymmetry here. First, when you do top and bottom, right, it's asymmetrical. And notice I very carefully move my skyline so that it's above the center line of this image. This was a very tough one to compose and get it just right because I was limited by the top of the tree here and also by the length of this. So the cropping of this was very critical, and you had to have enough room up here, a little buffer zone. But the top and bottom are certainly different. Left and right are different. So all four quadrants are definitely different. But there's one other subtlety here, and that is the gradient in the sky. In the original image, the sky was much more consistent, but I created a black and white gradient in the sky, which adds that nice asymmetry, making these quadrants even more different. So it's a lot of asymmetry in this image. Here's another image where the asymmetry really doesn't work as well as it might. And that's, again, because a lot of the complexity in the image, this top part is, it's pretty similar. All right, we've got a peak here and a peak here, but they're kind of positioned in the same place. So there's a little bit of difference, but not much. And plus the lack of separation between the mountaintops and the sky, that doesn't help any. And when you look at the bottom half of this image, we're looking at right and left. In these two quadrants, they're really pretty similar. This top half here, if you look at these, they're a lot different than the bottom portion here. So this is an image where there's some asymmetry, but because of the complexity and lack of separation, it doesn't work very well. Here's another slappy in the face asymmetrical image. All right, and this is one of those images where we're just capturing the essence, all right, where I'm doing a partial portrait of the agave spears. Top and bottom, left and right, all four quadrants are very different. So it's very obvious there and very powerful tool. This is an interesting image where one image component really makes it in terms of asymmetry. If we draw our line right through the middle here, we had to be careful on this one because this is almost right in the middle of the image, the water horizon line. This more obvious horizon line is up a little bit, so we're okay. But when we look at left and right, without this image element right here, if this was just all grasses down here, boy, the right and left portions of the image would be almost identical, all right, because of these slopes on both sides and the symmetry of this mountain. So this image element and its placement is not only important for separation, like we talked about, but in terms of establishing asymmetry for this image. Boy, it's very, very important. This is one of my favorite student images. One of my students named Randy Daly shot this image for a motion project for our class, and I just love this because of its simplicity and asymmetry. And notice 1, 2, 3 elements, and look at the asymmetry. It's very obvious here. All four quadrants are very separate, left and right. So yeah, it's really a study of photographic elegance in terms of simplicity and asymmetry. Yeah, nicely done. And as I mentioned, sometimes asymmetry can be subtle and extremely important, even in its subtlety. When we look here, top and bottom are certainly different. Left and right are different, and the quadrants are different, particularly the 3 and 4, the lower two quadrants. Up here, I paid particular attention to making sure that there were more of the light trees up here than there were here in the composition to make sure that I had good asymmetry up here. The other thing that's a little more subtle here is notice the offset to the left, offset to the right, offset to the left, so that the eye migrates across the image like this. So the basic asymmetry is very obvious, but some of the placement of the objects to move the eye across the image is a little more subtle. And even when you're shooting snapshots, use these same 4 pillars of principles. And here, we've got asymmetry that's at work, but it's somewhat subtle. And actually, this image is kind of one of those exception to the rules image, because you might wonder, well, is there any time you can have a symmetrical image? And sure, in this case, look at the top and bottom are almost identical to each other because, well, it's a reflection. It's supposed to be almost the same. But I paid attention when I did my final cropping so that I had a little bit more room up here. I would either make more room at the bottom or the top just to create a little bit of asymmetry. It's subtle in here. Otherwise, the reflection is almost identical. So just to sum up, 4 components, right? Vertical asymmetry, horizontal asymmetry, 4 quadrants, and you can use the rule of thirds to help you as well. And sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's obvious, but it's always important.